All right. Obviously, the weekend is not complete, but we've got a little bit of a break, or really a long break here before, our last pick and then the undrafted free agency process. We're really pleased with at least where we sit, as we head into the sixth round. We expect by the end of the weekend we'll be able to add, 10 rookies that we're really excited about, as well as, 2 future fourth-round picks in the 27 draft. At the onset of this, or I guess, last week, I talked about, our goal heading into the weekend is, not just the first round, but it's how do we maximize the resources that we head into the draft with, and that's whether you're using those resources, some of them for veteran players, whether you're using it to generate more by trading down, obviously the players that you select, and then the future draft capital that you're able to manufacture. So we're really pleased with where we sit today with the combination of players and future assets that we're able to create. We're looking forward to finishing strong and signing some undrafted free agents that can help our club this year. So with that, I'll open up for questions.
Do you plan drafting Taylan Green and just what's your thinking behind him and what traits did you like about him?
Yeah, it's probably a little similar to what I mentioned yesterday, Mary Kay, where at the quarterback position, it's the most important in sports. We'll make a bet or acquire a player that we like if it's the right cost. With Taylan specifically, very mature young man, really strong makeup, and he has rare physical gifts. He has size, he has elite speed, he has a big arm. He's going to need some polish with his game, but he has the work ethic and he has the acumen to do so. So we're looking forward to adding him to the roster and adding him to the mix in terms of competition.
Let's talk about potentially moving Taylan to wide receiver or tight end.
We're not. He's playing quarterback.
Andrew, when you talk about polishing, the turnovers were obviously the big thing about his game that seemed to be a red flag when he was at Arkansas and Boise State. When you watched him on film, how much of him, do you see a pathway to where he can work on that as he develops at this level?
Yeah, I think context is important with that type of thing, Chris. I think, Arkansas, they were actually one of the better offenses in college football and faced, I think it was like the toughest slate of college football opponents, with the other side of the ball was not nearly as productive, to put it kindly. And so I think, as we've seen here, when there's maybe a little bit of undue stress towards one side of the ball, it can put you in disadvantageous situations. And I think Taylan had a fair amount of that. That being said, there are absolutely areas of his game that he has to clean up. But we are looking forward to working with him and potentially developing him because he does have a really strong makeup, rare physical gifts, and then really the want to improve.
When you pick a quarterback like this with this much just raw skill, even if he's not ready to start or play for you, can you find a way to use that guy as a weapon when he's not your quarterback?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I think so. The short answer is yes. Obviously, his gift as a ball carrier and a runner is pretty unique, but it does have to go within the whole. I guess it really has to go with the offensive vision, and I think that's something that over the course of the spring and into training camp, as our offensive staff works with this group of players, we'll define the identity and figure out how much of that anything we work with all those guys, and we like to
compare like Taylan's Jackson, but obviously knowing that Todd has worked with like a really dynamic quarterback, how much that maybe gave you a little more comfort in making the pick, though you acknowledge he's going to need some polish?
Honestly, Daniel, it had very little to do with that. Todd's obviously he's worked with Lamar, but Lamar was pretty unique relative to the quarterbacks that he had worked with previously. I don't know that Lamar and Stetson Bennett could be more polar opposite. That's one of Todd's gifts, the ability to maximize, offensive skill sets, period, and particularly at that spot. For us, it was as we looked at the prospects who were available to us, their relative strengths and weaknesses. We felt like Taylan was the right pick at the top of 6, and look, we're excited to work with him.
Years, you guys have typically had 4 quarterbacks at least in the offseason and throughout training camp. Like, what's the benefits for that many arms on the room for you guys?
Yeah, well, part of it you needed to get through. I mean, look, we lived it firsthand last year, right? Like you needed to get through camp. we do believe in keeping 3 on the active roster and ideally a 4th on the practice squad. But it's it's an important position. There is attrition throughout the year, and I think also the other element is it's never a problem to have too many good players. It just isn't. Like, even as I think through last year with that position, we had 2 young guys, 2 vets who either got hurt or at one point were no longer the starter because of performance, and we were able to turn those players into resources that could help the team this upcoming offseason. So sometimes it's not a linear path in terms of how they positively impact the roster of the organization. It may not always be on field, but we're going to try and make as many calculated bets as we can and take steps from there.
Andrew, going back to Taylan, the offense he played in at Arkansas, Bobby Petrino, also, kind of off of Daniel with Lamar. I mean, what does that offense do specifically to kind of help a quarterback, prepare a quarterback to kind of go? I mean, is there things that transfer from that?
I mean, I think there are a lot of commonalities in college and pro offenses. Maybe I should back up. There's only one Lamar Jackson, and so I understand the comparison there, but there's one Lamar Jackson. I think how Arkansas deployed Taylan in the run game, the QB-driven run game, that's probably like the bigger component, the bigger similarity. And when you have someone with his athletic gifts, that's something that you certainly want to utilize within the offensive system.
I guess following up, I guess it was more about how Petrino prepares quarterbacks more so than a direct comparison to Lamar.
Yeah, I mean, his track record speaks for itself. That being said, all these quarterbacks who come into the NFL, this weekend, they have a lot to learn. And fortunately, we have one of the best teachers with Todd, and we know he's in good hands.
37 turnovers.
Sorry?
How do you get past just the 37 turnovers in two seasons?
Yeah, so I think that goes with context, right? Like, part of it is it a situation where they're down, they're in heavy drop back, they're past 2 scores, and then part of it is guys do need to take steps and improve, Tony. But the other side of the coin is you do have players who are able to generate enough explosive plays where not a terminal, but maybe a higher turnover rate is at least more doable for the team, and that's what Arkansas, experienced. Probably a perfect example would be maybe Josh Allen earlier in his career, where he generated so many explosive plays that you could live with some of the errors. Now, once he became an MVP, he was able to minimize those with time on task and experience. But at this point in the draft, there are no perfect prospects, but Taylan has a lot that make us want to work with him.
If Brailsford could
really care who it is, as long as we have quality production at all 5 spots.
if that would happen, the second part would be having 2 rookies starting. Would that be a little bit dicey?
I don't think so. I mean, the Patriots had that and went to the Super Bowl this year.
Like about Joe Glover and what's his outlook as he comes in the door as far as where do you view?
Yeah, Joe has size, really good hands. He is a player that can produce both in the Y, which is kind of your traditional inline, role, and the F role, which is a little bit more of a receiving role. So to have that flexibility in the room is helpful and important. So he was the guy that we liked, we felt was there for the value, and we're happy to add him to the team.
Andrew, did you ever think you were going to make all 4 of those picks that were so close together in the 5th round?
We were ready to. I was hoping that we wouldn't have to, just because I thought that, look, there were players that we liked there. But I thought combination of some of the things that we did were going to be more impactful for the team.
When you look at the versatility so many of these guys that you guys have drafted have, how much do you anticipate that maybe playing into camp as they get here, of exploring other ways that they might be used outside of their primary role?
Yeah, it's actually honestly a little bit of a delicate balance. Todd talks about it all the time, and he's used some other young players that he's coached where the excitement can be, while like when we select this guy, he can do this, he can do that, he can do this, and you don't want to spread them too thin through early. So we'll probably start them off in kind of and let them get their sea legs, so to speak, before branching out. But it's certainly something that we're excited about as we move forward.
Seeing combine results from a guy that size in terms of Taylan, since really like Calvin Johnson is comparable. And was it that point in the draft, just the athleticism just outweighs like maybe a more polished passer like a Nussmeier in that situation?
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily compare him to the other prospects other than say that we felt like Taylan's makeup, his physicals, we just think there's a lot to work with. Yeah.
I know, obviously, you guys don't have an answer from Joel in terms of his future, but given the amount of resources dedicated to the offensive line that you guys have obviously done, is there anything to read into there, I guess, in terms of you guys, in terms of like maybe what the direction you guys are heading as far as the offensive line is concerned?
I wouldn't say so. I think when we've been at our best, when we had the best unit in the league, we were deep. It wasn't just quality, but it was depth as well. And so, there are a couple positions that once you get past this time of the year, you just can't acquire till like really the next off season. And then the offensive line position group, that's one of those spots. So when we can add players, the bigger guys that are hard to find, we'll do that.
Parker, when you drafted him, I think you said something like he's exactly what you're looking for. What is it about him, and is the weight a concern for you?
Yeah, we always, and Hop's even probably best at saying this. Like, if you didn't know, you wouldn't be able to tell with his play.